Imagine a loyal dog, shivering in the cold, patiently waiting for a second chance at life. Picture a dedicated shelter, wrongly accused, but determined to keep its doors open for animals in need. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about unwavering hope, powerful bonds, and the fight to restore trust. Watch as lives transform and discover how a community's love and resilience can overcome the odds and save countless animals. This journey will touch your heart and inspire your soul. Every day, amidst the chaos of the city's busiest animal shelter, a small scruffy puppy stood out. He would sit just beyond the iron gates, his wide, pleading eyes following every passerby. Yet, day after day, he was ignored. Staff members rushed to complete their tasks, dismissing him as just another stray. For Emily, a young volunteer with a compassionate heart, the puppy's quiet persistence was impossible to overlook. Why did he keep coming back? What was he waiting for? My memories flooded back, waiting for Quinn to reply, eloping through my mind, ready to hear the answers. Very little girls. There are so many. The shelter was always filled with the sounds of barking dogs, meowing cats, and the clanging of feeding bowls. Workers moved with hurried efficiency, focused on the endless tasks required to care for dozens of animals. To most, it was just a job. For Emily, it was a calling. She showed up every day, driven by her love for animals and a desire to make a difference. One chilly Monday morning, as Emily unloaded bags of donated pet food from her car, she noticed the puppy for the first time. He sat just outside the gate, his matted fur trembling in the crisp breeze. Unlike the shelter dogs, who barked or wagged their tails at the sight of people, this little one sat silently, his gaze fixed on the shelter entrance. Emily frowned as she approached. "What's your story, little guy?" she murmured. Before she could do more, a staff member called out, "Hey, Emily, can you help with the feeding rotation?" Torn, she replied, "Be right there," before crouching down to speak softly to the pup. "Don't go anywhere, okay? I'll be back." But when she returned that afternoon, the puppy was gone. Over the next few days, Emily noticed the puppy would return each morning, always in the same spot. His small body shivered as he watched the comings and goings of the shelter staff. No one else seemed to notice him, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about him. "What's up with that stray outside?" she asked a coworker during a coffee break. "Which one?" the worker replied with a shrug. "Strays come and go all the time. If it's not inside the gate, it's not our problem." To Emily, every animal mattered. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stayed late, bringing a small bowl of food and a blanket to the gate. Kneeling down, she said softly, "I don't know who you're waiting for, but I'm here now." The puppy hesitated, his weary eyes scanning her face. Slowly, he inched closer and sniffed the food. Emily noticed faint scars on his paws and how thin he was. This wasn't just a stray. This was a dog with a story. Morning and evening, Emily brought him food and water, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. Slowly, the puppy began to trust her. By the end of the week, he let her sit just a few feet away while he ate. His tail wagged faintly whenever she spoke to him. In that moment, she ran her hands over his face and whispered a word of, "Why don't you just bring him inside?" Another volunteer, Sarah, asked one afternoon. "I've tried," Emily sighed, "but he won't let me pick him up. He's skittish, like he's afraid of being confined. I don't want to scare him off." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe he's been hurt before. Some strays have a harder time trusting people, especially if they've been abandoned." "I really don't like this," Sarah said, groaning. The thought broke Emily's heart. How could anyone abandon such a sweet, loyal dog? She resolved to be patient and give him the time and space he needed. One evening, the puppy wasn't at the gate. Panic flickered in Emily's chest. Grabbing a flashlight, she searched the area, softly calling out. She found him, curled up in an alley behind the shelter, trembling against a pile of cardboard boxes. "There you are," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. She crouched down, holding out her hand. "Why are you back here? Let's get you somewhere safe." The puppy whimpered but didn't move. Emily noticed a faint limp as he shifted. Gently, she draped her jacket over him. "It's okay. I'm here." Back at the shelter, she placed him in an empty kennel with a soft blanket and a bowl of water. "This is just for tonight," she promised, stroking his head. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out what's next." See tomorrow. The next morning, Emily arrived early to check on him. He looked up at her, his eyes less fearful. "Good morning, Blake," she said, giving him a name. Emily let out a breath and looked back, grinning. She took him to the shelter's vet, who diagnosed a minor sprain in his front leg. "With rest and care, he'll be fine," the vet assured her. Emily began to wonder about his past. Where had he come from? Why had he been so determined to stay near the shelter? "Emily," she repeated. "Emily." There was a long silence. Determined to uncover his story, Emily asked around the neighborhood, showing flyers with his picture. An elderly man mentioned seeing the puppy around for weeks. "He always heads back to the shelter, like he's waiting for something," he said. The comments sparked a realization. Could the puppy be waiting for someone connected to the shelter? Emily searched the shelter's records, looking for clues. After hours of digging, she found a name: Rebecca Harper. Rebecca had been a dedicated volunteer, but had stopped coming months ago due to personal circumstances. Attached to her file was a photo of Rebecca holding a puppy, one that looked exactly like Blake. Emily's heart raced. Could this be her puppy? And if so, why hadn't Rebecca returned for him? She shared her discovery with Sarah. "Rebecca was one of our best volunteers," Sarah recalled. "But she left suddenly. We thought she found homes for the puppies she cared for." Sarah's eyes widened. Armed with Rebecca's last known address, Emily set out to find answers. Beneath the cover of a hood, the figures carried the puppy in one arm and a piece of rope in the other. The video showed them tying the puppy to the gate before quickly walking away, disappearing into the darkness. "It's too blurry to make out any details," Sarah said, her voice tinged with frustration. "None of it is moving, Sarah. Maybe someone recognizes them," Emily replied, snapping a photo of the screen. "I'll ask around," she said. I swallowed at the little overseer in the photo. The rest of the day was spent canvassing the area near the shelter. Emily showed the photo to nearby business owners, delivery drivers, and anyone who might have been in the vicinity that night. Most people shook their heads apologetically, unable to help. But at a small diner a few blocks away, Emily found a lead. She was asleep. An employee named Carla studied the photo carefully. "I think I've seen this person before," she said slowly. "They come in here sometimes, always wearing that hoodie. Never talk much, just grab coffee to go." Emily's heart raced. "House. Do you know their name?" Carla shook her head. "No. But I've seen him leave on a bike a couple of times. They always head toward the apartment complex on Elm Street." "Thank you," Emily said, her excitement bubbling over. "You've been a huge help." That evening, Emily drove to the apartment complex Carla mentioned. It was a modest building with peeling paint and a small parking lot. She parked and approached the front entrance, unsure of her next move. There were dozens of units, and she had no idea which one belonged to the person in the video. As she stood there debating her options, a young boy rode up on a bicycle. He stopped in front of her, eyeing her curiously. "Are you looking for someone?" he asked. "Yes, actually," Emily said, showing him the photo. "Have you seen this person around here?" The boy squinted at the image. "That's Mr. Jacob," he said matter-of-factly. "He lives on the second floor, but he doesn't talk to people much." She nodded. "The very best." She shivered. and the boy turned around and slowly slipped away from their house, taking his little bird with him. Emily's pulse quickened. "Thank you," she said, heading for the stairs. She found the unit easily, a plain door with peeling numbers and no decorations. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. There was no response at first, but after a few moments, the door creaked open. A man in his mid-30s stood there, his hoodie pulled low over his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice wary. "Are you Jacob?" Emily asked. "I count." The man's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" I work at the animal shelter," Emily said, keeping her tone calm. "I'm trying to find out what happened to this puppy." She held up the flyer. Jacob's expression shifted, guilt flickering across his face. "I don't know anything about that," he said quickly, starting to close the door. "Please wait," Emily said, stepping forward. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just want to understand what happened." Jacob hesitated, his grip on the door loosening. "Why do you care so much?" "Because this puppy is waiting for someone," Emily said softly. "I think he's waiting for Rebecca Harper. If you know anything about her, I need to know." Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Oh, all right," he said reluctantly. "Come inside." Best we, he murmured to himself. Emily stepped into Jacob's modest apartment. Her eyes scanned the sparse furnishings and the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. Jacob gestured toward a worn-out chair while he sat on the edge of his couch, his posture tense. "What? You've got guts showing up here," he said, his voice laced with irritation and resignation. "But I can tell you really care. So, I'll tell you what I know." Emma leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Please, anything you can share might help." Jacob hesitated, staring at the ground as though organizing his thoughts. "I knew Rebecca," he began. "Not well, but we lived in the same building for a while. She was one of the few people around here who was kind, I guess. Always smiling, even when things weren't great." "What do you mean by weren't great?" Emily asked. "She didn't talk about it much," Jacob replied. "But you could tell she was struggling, financially, emotionally, you name it. She loved that dog, though, talked about him all the time. So why would someone leave him at the shelter?" Emily pressed gently. Jacob sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. "A few months back, Rebecca just disappeared. No one knew where she went, but rumors started flying. Some people said she got a job out of town. Others said she moved in with family. I didn't think much of it until I saw her dog wandering around outside the building." Now I remembered," Harrington said. "A few months back, Rebecca just disappeared. No one knew where she went, but rumors started flying. Outside the building." Emily's stomach tightened. "Wandering alone." Jacob nodded. It wasn't like her. She would never have left him like that, unless something happened. "I didn't know what to do, so I brought him to the shelter. I figured it was better than him starving out there." Jacob nodded and said he'd be back in a few days. He gave me the location of the shelter. The weight of Jacob's words hit Emily like a wave. Rebecca's sudden disappearance and the puppy's abandonment were pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to assemble. "Did she say anything before she left? Anything that might explain what happened?" "She mentioned something about visiting her grandmother," Jacob said after a moment. "But that's all I know. Look, I didn't want to get involved. I just did what I thought was right." David said. Emily's mind raced. A grandmother. This could be a lead. "Do you know where her grandmother lives?" she asked. Jacob shook his head. "I think it's somewhere upstate, but I can't say for sure." Though it wasn't much, the information gave Emily a sense of direction. "Thank you for telling me," she said sincerely. "You did the right thing bringing him to the shelter." She spoke. Jacob shrugged, his expression softening. "That dog deserves better than what he's been through. I hope you find Rebecca." Emily left the apartment feeling a mix of gratitude and urgency. Rebecca's grandmother might hold the key to understanding what had happened. Tracking her down would be no small task, but Emily was determined to try. Outside the shelter, the camera lingered on Blake, waiting patiently in the cold. His small frame stood resolute against the elements, his deep brown eyes scanning every passerby with quiet hope. Staff and visitors walked by, oblivious to his vigil. The scene transitioned to Rebecca stepping out of a car, her eyes wide with disbelief as they met Blake's. She rushed toward him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Blake barked excitedly and wagged his tail, bounding forward to meet her. Their embrace was interspersed with Rebecca's narration. When I thought I had lost everything, Blake reminded me of what truly matters. Rebecca's voice cracked with emotion. He waited for me, even when I didn't think I was worth waiting for. He's not just my dog. He's my family. Within days of posting the video online, it garnered millions of views. Comments poured in, many from people moved to tears by the bond between Rebecca and Blake. Viewers shared their own stories of adopting pets and how those bonds had transformed their lives. Soon, people called in managers to ask if the repairs were possible, and Blake called a partner who whispered, "Mandy, Mandy, 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 Mandy." The newfound attention brought waves of support for the shelter. Donations surged and adoption inquiries skyrocketed. Families visited the shelter, inspired by Rebecca and Blake's story, eager to create their own tales of hope and companionship. Animal shelters across the country began reaching out to Emily, the shelter's media coordinator, expressing interest in replicating tales of hope. They saw the potential of storytelling to foster empathy, not just for animals, but for the humans who care for them. Rebecca's new job at the shelter allowed her to channel her passion into helping animals find loving homes. She often shared her story with potential adopters. "Every animal here has a story," she would say, kneeling beside Blake, who sat proudly at her side. They're just waiting for someone to take the time to listen. Blake became a regular presence at the shelter, comforting nervous animals with his calm demeanor. He was soon unofficially dubbed the shelter's therapy dog, a title he wore with pride. Spurting from the couch, Blake restlessly turned over and over in the shelter until Blake began to. One day, a young girl hesitated as she approached Rebecca and Blake. Holding her mother's hand tightly, she asked softly, "Is that Blake? Blake?" "Blake," Rebecca smiled warmly, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze. "Yes, this is Blake. Would you like to pet him?" Dowers was halfway up the staircase. Blake reached the top and stopped. The girl nodded eagerly, her small hand gently stroking Blake's fur. Her mother explained they were there to adopt a dog after losing their family pet months earlier. 6. "I saw your story online," the mother said, her voice tinged with emotion. "It gave me hope that we could find another companion to love." Not all attention was positive. One morning, reporters gathered outside the shelter, alleging financial misconduct and fabrications in the shelter's stories. The accusations sent shockwaves through the team. Emily, the shelter's media coordinator, convened an emergency meeting. "We've worked too hard to let this define us," she said. "We'll address these lies with the truth." The team rallied together, presenting clear financial records and testimonials from adopters. Rebecca spoke publicly, her voice unwavering as she recounted her journey. "Blake saved me, and this shelter saved us both. The love and loyalty here are real, and no one can take that away." To rebuild trust, the shelter organized a day of gratitude, celebrating the lives transformed by their work. The shelter bustled with energy as families reunited with staff, sharing laughter and memories. Rebecca and Blake stood at the entrance, greeting visitors. A young boy excitedly pointed at Blake. "Is that Blake? The one from the video?" Rebecca smiled. "Yes, this is Blake." The boy hesitantly reached out, and Blake licked his hand gently, drawing giggles of delight. Emily addressed the crowd, her voice filled with gratitude. "This shelter isn't just a place for animals. It's a place for hope, second chances, and community. The day's highlight was the unveiling of the Wall of Loyalty, showcasing photos and messages from adopters. Tears flowed freely as families found their pets' photos and read the heartfelt notes. Later, the shelter received an anonymous letter exposing the source of the false allegations, a competitor's shelter. The team confronted the truth with transparency, hosting a press conference to clear their name. Rebecca, Emily, and the entire team stood united, their dedication shining through. Blake sat calmly at Rebecca's feet, embodying the shelter's mission, to give every life a second chance. Their perseverance inspired a local philanthropist who announced a generous donation to fund the shelter's expansion. "This isn't just about money," he said, handing Emily a check. "It's about ensuring every animal has a chance to find a family, just like Blake did." As the sun set on the day of gratitude, Emily sat in the shelter's garden, watching Blake play with a litter of puppies. Rebecca joined her, smiling. "Is a natural caretaker," Rebecca said softly. Emily nodded. "Blake's been through so much, but he still gives so freely. It's a reminder of why we do this." Emily joined in. Challenges lay ahead, but the shelter's path felt clearer than ever. Together, they knew they could face anything. And with Blake by their side, they were just getting started.